start? Which one are we on first? The congressional?
Yeah, 76 congressional.
77.
Or
77. It was he was elected in November of 76, and then it was, the campaigns began in December of 76 and concluded, I believe, in March of 77.
That's after Young had become ambassador.
Young became ambassador to the United Nations, and we decided that it was an opportunity that did not have much downside. I didn't have to give up my legislative seat. It was at least a shot, and it was quick. Wasn't going to go on and on for a long period of time. We raised $90,000 in about 90 days. Weich was, of course, we knew a formidable opponent, and as was John Lewis. The other, Ralph David Abernathy and some crazy guy, I don't even remember his name, and then Mildred Glover. I don't remember who else ran. Republican National Committee didn't give us any credence at all, which I didn't realize in the beginning. The guy who had run in this general election, Ed Gadrix, decided to run. He wanted to run again, and so I was more of the establishment person. He had run just a fledgling campaign, but getting him out was not going to be easy, and and we wanted him out. The people that surrounded him in the party tended to be the old line dissidents, Dixiecrat, far right maybe, and my supporters tended to be the group that ultimately took over the party in 1980, which we talked about, right, pragmatists. And they ran a poll. Mattingly was chairman of the party, and they ran a poll, or had been, I don't know if he was still chairman or not, 75, 77. Yes, he was chairman. And they ran a poll, and I told him not to run a poll, that wouldn't help anything, because I said Ed Gadrix will come out well, because he's just run for Congress, and people will confuse the name with Gingrich. And so there's a real flaw in it. He's picking both those things up. The poll showed that he is ahead, even though I said he couldn't raise 10 cents. And you're going to have to mount a pretty formidable campaign. Well, they ran the poll, and indeed it showed Gadrix.
Who is the state?
The Republican National Committee.
Okay.
Through the state party. And I think that Mattingly thought he would use that to get one of us out. I don't know whether to this day Mac thought he was going to talk me out of it or not, but it's the only time that I can ever really remember screaming at someone. I was just screaming at Mac Mattingly. It was one of the dumbest, most idiotic things I'd ever heard, and that they'd let it leak, see. Anyway, one thing and another took place, and we finally talked Gadrix out of running. I had a press conference. Mac, I think, trying to cleanse himself a little bit, participated in the negotiations, called Gadrix up and insisted that he get to the press conference on time. I'd gotten a call the night before about 2 a.m. from Gadrix. They'd obviously been celebrating either his getting out or staying in, and I was very worried that he would even show up. And indeed, we did have a hard time getting him there, but he did. And one of the vignettes of political activities, in the middle of the press conference, this guy, I think his name was Jack Thrift, stood up in the back of the room. The room was absolutely packed, and pulls this dagger out and screams "Et tu, Brute," when Gadrix gets out of the race. one of his supporters, it was a letter opener that he'd painted the tip of it red. It's still around here somewhere, it's a piece of memorabilia. But at the moment, he thought, oh my God. So then came the race. Now, we were betting on the fact that the North Side had a Republican tendency and would stick, and that would get us in the runoff. That was flawed, because the North Side was still imbued with the racial aspects of the situation here in Atlanta and Fulton County, and so they began to move toward which white candidate would most likely defeat the black candidate. And Weich, one of the criticisms I would fed that, which I thought was incongruous. And there was a flap during the campaign of a letter that was written by Clifford Oxford. He's a local attorney here, and he was supporting Weich, and it was right in the letter, the purpose of it. And that came out in New Republic or some periodical, and we spent about 5 days in a flap over it, and then it disappeared, as things will do. We did begin to mount a pretty aggressive campaign. We were tremendous billboards, a lot of visual activity. We knew we were gaining, and I had promises of, if we got in the runoff with Weich, a number of people, including Julian Bond, who might have come out in support of my candidacy. I'd worked with these people in the legislature, so we thought if we could get in the runoff, we could really turn this thing upside down. So we were fighting to get in the runoff, and we did...
Conceding Weich first place?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we were running against Lewis for second slot. Lewis was having a hard time. His campaign just wasn't coming together. And the other candidates were just in the way. So we really were writing messages at the end that tried to indicate that Weich, we already knew, was in the runoff, and put myself as the candidate against Lewis for the second runoff spot. We were trying to recover some of this North Side vote, and we did. And it came in as the evening wore on at the final election. I was third, but a very, very narrow margin between myself and Lewis. We just about made it. If we'd gotten in that, it would have been a real Donnybrook. I have no idea what would have happened. There's no time to poll and all that sort of thing, although the RNC was just poised to come in full bore.
They had given some support.
Yeah, well, they gave us the manager,
Carter
Kluge, character, absolute character. From Baltimore, he had all the air of a in-city Baltimore street kid. He was just very bright, very aggressive, an RNC type. Brought a kid with him named Dennis Brown, and another guy who I can't remember, who I ordered out of the state after about 2 weeks. Just absolute.
There was not a good fit at all.
Well, he was just so such an ideologue, it made no sense at all. I mean, he was way off, out of the mainstream, and I told Carter to get rid of him. And my wife and I still remember Carter fondly. He was funny, and he did give us a boost. I mean, we were trying to run it with local management, and we transitioned from a local campaign to a federal campaign is much bigger than you expect. Even if you know that it's that way, you still can't really quite prepare yourself. And with only 90 to 100 days, it was very difficult to make that transition. He helped us. He really did manage the effort and free you to go out and be the candidate. But there were so many. He was, for example, he went to see Rocky, the movie, 3 times while he was here. Very colorful. The kind of, I'm sure if you could follow him politically, there'd be many, many interesting events in his life. The one thing I remember, we'd meet late at night and we were doing a comparison piece, and I wanted a hard-hitting comparison piece between myself and White, but I wanted it to be stately. And they produced this thing and printed it. It was just horrible, black and white, and it was just very, very objectionable. So we were sitting, as you and I are, at the fireplace here. It's about 1 a.m. And I remember holding this up. I said, "Do you remember how this piece was supposed to look?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Does this piece look like that?" And he said, "No." I said, "So what are we going to do with this piece?" He said, "Throw it out." I said, "Right." And but he was a very colorful figure.
What role did he play in, say, bringing out this White Fowler Oxford letter?
Oh, I don't think any. No, that was an. If it was, I didn't know about it. He may have, but I don't remember it that way. But it surfaced in some. It was referred to in some national magazine, and it affected a man here that I knew named, I think, Bill Patterson, who worked for Georgia Federal. And I can't remember how he was involved with it, but somehow perhaps he had seen the letter, and it was sort of embarrassing because his name got associated with the incident. I felt badly for him. He wasn't used to politics, and it sort of shook him away from things. And I saw him just recently and started to stop and go back and say something to him, but he was going up a stairway or something. But it was an uncomfortable 2 or 3 days. As things like that, as something broke and it was disquieting. White and I talked about it. White was irritated about it, and I said, "Look, I didn't write the letter. You know, it's your guy." And it disappeared. It never became a major issue in the campaign. But it was an undercurrent, and it clearly was a factor in the election.
Looking back at that campaign, how would you assess it in terms of its strengths and its weaknesses?
Well, we were not as mature and as prepared for the scope of the campaign as he was. He's an excellent campaigner, White is. He's very bright. I was in session, and that was affecting our performance because I was trying not to, I was at that juncture where are you absent?
Right.
Then they would have come down on that, so I was having to be there every day. And that was a problem. But I don't know what you could have done about it. I think maturity, I really don't fault. I think that with the limited resources available to us at that time, that we came a long way. I remember subsequent to that talking to some people at the Republican National Committee, and they were absolutely astounded at the distance we'd come. They had us at like 11% or less when we started. And as I said, we almost pushed ourselves into the runoff. So I don't have a lot of regrets about it. We ran a pretty vigorous campaign on probably half the resources that he had. I think that as with anything, if you were to run a campaign like that now, we'd come out of the running gate much more quickly. A little bit like the first campaign for state senate. It must have taken us a month to prepare a bumper sticker. Well, we'd have a bumper sticker today in here in probably 48 hours. Literally took a month, and they were horrible. One of the funny stories of that campaign, they were paper, so they faded immediately, and you could not get them off. You'd have to take your bumper off before you could get that bumper sticker off. And of course now they're plastic and they come off easily and they look right. But and I only mention that as it being analogous to what we were trying to do in the congressional campaign. Our visibility went up dramatically, and it probably had many positive effects for us. It created sort of a political divorce. The woman that had managed my political affairs since '70 could not make the transition to Mary Frances Peters. She just could not do it. These outsiders, and it's that kind of thing happens from time to time. Very possessive person, and I'd had trouble with that for several years. And so I remember talking to my dad. My father said, "You're getting a divorce. That's what's happening here." And I made a decision during that campaign that we had to find a way to put some distance, and I did. It was very painful, but we've remained very close friends. I'm a tremendous admirer of her. She's gone on. She now is the national representative of Girl Scouts of America. So all that training helped her too.
Sure.
But she just could not deal with those outsiders. She made one contribution, though, for which I'll be forever grateful in that campaign, and that she just absolutely gave them fits about their spending. And as a result, when the campaign was over, I only had about a $15,000 deficit. And that's the kind of campaign was that short, you're not really prepared for it. You can really get hurt.
Right.
It was a well done campaign, and I think had it gone on longer, had the fuse been a little longer, my guess is that we just might have made the runoff. And that would have been an unusual situation where you'd have had White and Coverdell running against each other with Lewis having come out, because I think we were beginning to make the North Side come home. I think that's where our numbers, obviously we're not coming from the black community at that time. And had we come in with, I would have given him the edge even if I'd gotten in the runoff, in hindsight. But it would have been interesting to see. I think a lot of people would have, then we would have become a philosophical issue, and I think a lot of it might have come home, but there's no way to really know.
Right, sure. Speaking of the fifth, let's move into reapportionment, and I'm more interested in 82, I guess, than the 81, 82 reapportionment in 71, 72, although I know the first one directly affected you.
I'm going to be speaking to the reapportionment committee next Tuesday, and there's several things I'm going to tell them. That it was a unique experience, really, to work through that reapportionment. I went to Julian Bond on the floor of the House, and this clearly was, I mean, this office was the master plan for an idea that did work. It's fun to see him work once in a while. But having been through 71, and I'd worked very closely with that reapportionment.
Oh, you had, okay.
So I knew a lot about it, and there weren't too many that did.
Let's provide some background then.
Well, I had just been elected, and
right.
whammo, I'm in a reapportionment thing, and just a freshman kid. And
you had to run again.
And I had to run again right after that. So, and I was, the first time you're elected, the thought of, I'd run in 68, I'd run the mayor's race in 69, I'd run in 70, I'd won, and then all of a sudden it's all at risk. I mean, it energizes the political engine. And so I was following it pretty closely, and I recognized that you had two Republican senators in the North Side, and there wasn't enough folks there for 2 Republican senators. So I engaged in this process of taking, I knew it was going to go into Cobb County. It's a little bit like when I ran for this. I mean, the thing about the office was we typically were a little bit ahead of the spin, and we knew it was going into Cobb County, which of course it ultimately did. The 56th Senate seat today is North Fulton and on over into Cobb County. But so what we tried to do was we engaged a lot of young volunteers. This Mike Reeves was very active in it, and we divided the North Side into 2 parts so that both could logically run, Earl Patton and Paul Coverdell, and I took the worst case. I'll be the one that has to fight with Cobb. I'm starting to meet with Cobb people, and we were planning it. Earl was intransigent. Absolutely wouldn't hear of it. The district he wanted was the bulb right in the center of the North Side. Buckhead up to the perimeter. Just a little round ball right on the North Side. I could not budge him. So I began running against him. And
you also changed residents at some point in there.
Oh, yes. And we won't get off in all that unless you want to come back to it, but it was the combination of the Carter, anti-Carter, and then your own survival law mixed into. Anyway, I ended up organizing a battle group. Everett Milliken had been working for the committee, and they betrayed him. They at the very end, he was working for the committee, and he recognized that they lied to him. Came forward with this plan that started punishing people. It wasn't academically fair. I don't remember all, but he
was still a state senator?
No, he was working for the committee staff. I don't know whether he was paid or not, but I remember being there, and he just went bananas. You know, he's a very, very smart man. I had not realized how brilliant this guy was. And I was sitting there, and I watched him, and I went over to him and said, so come on over. I got a hotel suite down at Howard Johnson's South. He moved in, I moved in. Al Holloway was in there, and we began running Carter's battle plan. And it was being done by a Republican. So it is sort of...
So this was Carter's reapportionment plan.
The 71, the Carterites were trying to battle off the Maddoxites. And at the same time, this Patton thing got into it. And as I said, there's so many stories to tell. But I had learned by going through that, you know, what a block group was. And not too many people know how that system works. And so when I came up on this 80 reapportionment, I knew more than the average person. I already knew Todd Evans was in trouble because there were only so many white votes on the North Side. He was either going to get pushed into my district or pushed into a black district. And either way, he was in trouble. And I went and told him, and I outlined his options. But coming into that 80 reapportionment, because of all this other activity, I had an edge on folks. And I want to tell you one more vignette. One afternoon, we just added. You were constantly adding up these blocks.
These blocks,
and this is
which were
block groups. You know, in the urban areas, they get the census tract is down not just by precinct, but just down by blocks. And you add them up over and over and over. And one time, this college friend, Mike Reeves, was adding it up on the adding machine. You know, just hundreds of numbers. And Milliken was adding it up, but he just used pencil in his head. First of all, he finished before the kid on the adding machine did, and they were wrong, and Milliken was right, and the kid on the adding machine was wrong. He was just an amazing man. Just incredible. Back to 80. knew what was happening, and I had known that the people that dominate the process are rural, and they don't know how to deal with the urban community, and invariably all their reapportionment efforts, and it'll happen again, start out here and they work kind of till, and they work it all out till they get to sort of a circle around Atlanta. And so I went to Julian, and I remember saying specifically, I said, do you think that you and the people you represent are able to speak for yourself in the Congress, or do you need a liberal white establishment to tell you what is best for the black community in Congress? It was a very inflammatory thing to say. And he said, I believe we can speak for ourselves. He knew I wasn't being serious.
He knew there was something else.
He knew there was something I was... And he said, I said, will you spend a few minutes with me? He said, yes. I said, this is what's going to happen. They're going to draw this reapportionment plan, the congressional. They're going to come to Atlanta, and there's going to be a circle that's left. And they're going to draw a line east and west across that circle. And what that does is it puts just enough blacks in the group north of the circle to elect a white Democrat, and just enough blacks in the bottom part to elect a white Democrat, and deny two people that they don't want to have elected. They do not want there to be a black member of Congress from the 5th, and they do not want a Republican. And the way they block it is to cut the black community in half. And I said, it's as simple as this. You don't even have to attend the meetings, because they'll meet all year long, and it'll come to that circle. And all you have to do is come in that day with an amendment that moves the line from east to west to north to south. And the battle lines will be drawn. Well, of course, it's not nearly that simple, but sure, it almost happened exactly that way. The last meeting here, there was a circle, east to west, and Julian said, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment, and there was a hush, and the line went north to south, just complete silence. Allgood stepped in. I had been working with him, and I don't remember exactly what drove me to talk to him.
He was conducting the hearings all that summer.
I don't know, but there was some reason I'd gone to him in private. And he had become an ally in this. And it passed. And the exact sequence of the Senate floor to the committees I'll never remember, but of course the House objected to the Senate version. And the House position ultimately prevailed, as I knew that it would. And Julian and I took the case to the Justice Department.
You went directly?
Oh, yeah, went directly to the Justice Department. He and I flew to Washington together. We met, I don't remember whether it was, if you said the name, I'd remember it. Deputy Attorney General, and outlined our case. I remember the office was sort of cruddy looking, and I was sort of surprised drapes were falling off the wall. I said, gosh, I hope the government's going to bounce back. We almost missed the plane. It was a hastily set meeting. We had 20 minutes, ran to the airport. I was always surprised by the fact Julian couldn't go anywhere that people didn't. He was a movie star. It was amazing. You know, we walked down, people want to stop, cab drivers would stop. Saw him the other day in Philadelphia, same damn thing was still happening. Made our case, and the Justice Department sent 2 or 3 people down to Atlanta. They were working in the Russell Building, and we met with them. By that time, the logistics of the battle was shifting to our office. Julian was the spokesperson, we were the technicians. And we worked with them. It was like a battle plan, day and night. And we were not successful in the General Assembly. We were ultimately successful, as you know, through the courts. And I remember going in to the governor's office. Governor Busby was there, Mike Bowers, Julian and I don't know who else. And Bowers said, well, we've lost the battle, but not the war, it appears. And he said, what do you boys want? The governor and attorney general are basically saying, what will it take? And I said 65%. The 5th has to be 65% black. Or else.
Or else.
We keep after you. They won't sign on. And they finally did, as you know, draw a district. I don't know whether it was, I think that it was like this thing with the speaker. I think it was 64. You know, they just wouldn't do 65, but it was 64%. And I thought Julian would be the first congressman. Yeah, I thought that it would result in his becoming a member of the United States Congress very quickly, but they made some deal with White. I don't know what it was, or whether it even was one. It was rumored that it would give him one more term and that sort of thing. And oddly enough, the first result of it was the election of Swindle over Levitas. But it did exactly what it was designed to do, which was to produce a congressional district that was reflective of the two communities that were involved. They had produced another result by simply mixing them. And it went to the appeals court and ultimately to the United States Supreme Court, where the position of the Justice Department prevailed, our position over the state. Oh, there were many, many stories about it. It was, you know, hurried meetings in the middle of the night. The Deputy Attorney General here in the state tapping a witness under the table.
What's that?
Well, I don't remember her name. It was a large woman, was the acting for Bowers, and all these depositions, and she was signaling the witness, who was a friendly witness, by signaling under the table, which is, you know, it's just, you just do not do that. And she was caught doing it, and there was a flap over that, and of course the language of Joe Mack Wilson.
What do you recall about that episode of Joe Mack Wilson? And
well, I mean, it was just at that point it was getting into the racial attitudes of the participants, and you were being asked, you know, did you ever use a derogatory word or not? I was asked, as he was, and of course he was blatant. I think he ended up being a major factor in the case, because the justices on the appeals court just really came down on him as a blatant racist, which he was. I think that hurt the state badly. I remember I don't know if I told you the story about the document that was signed last time. Did I refer to that? No.
what was this?
Allgood called a meeting of all the members of the Senate across the street somewhere in the Judicial Building. We all got over there. And of course, he's now defending the districts around Augusta were involved in the justice complaints, as well as Fulton and the congressional. There were several allegations. And so he was getting every member of the Senate to sign an oath that there had been no racial implications in the manner in which the Senate plan was. Now we're talking about the Senate plan was drawn. And I was with Julian, and I said, Julian, we got to get out of here. And we walked out, and there was a press. The press was everywhere. And I took the form back to my office, and had it retyped. And it said that there were no racial overtones in Fulton County, which I did not think there were. And I signed it and took it back. By the time I got back, they had already, everybody left except Allgood and a couple others sitting there counting the forms, and they only got to 54. Where are the other two? And I said, well, here's mine, and they just took it and put it in the pile. And Julian signed it, which I never agreed. He should never sign that. But he did. You know, the intimidation of the Senate is a tough thing to deal with, and he was under a lot of pressure. Time goes on. I'm now a witness in the U.S. Appeals Court. The state has hired this guy, Doran, or whatever his name was, to be their special counsel, and here's Coverdell sitting there, and he's going to discredit me in a minute by saying, well, you signed a statement that there was no racism. It was one of the enjoyable moments of the whole battle. And I said, no, I didn't. And Bowers and this woman are flashing through papers over at the counsel's desk, you know, and he has this shocked look. They produce the paper and hand it to him. He says, here it is. I said, read it. So he read it. He just threw it back on the desk. No more questions. It was really a humorous moment in a very tense set of circumstances.
And where was Allgood? I mean, Allgood was...
Allgood drifted in and out. He was, you know, he was trying to, and he stayed with us pretty much on the congressional plan, but he was also fighting his own battle. Lester was his colleague from Augusta, and they had moved blacks around to protect Lester. And the ultimate conclusion was that the blacks were pushed back into Allgood's district. He didn't want them, and Lester did, so long as always had to be in a certain amount. Same thing they did in the 4th and 5th.
Right, I think now Allgood's is around 50-50 or something like that.
And Lester was defeated. Because when they determined you couldn't divide the black community in this manner, what happened was that, you know, Lester was counting on a block vote. It went away, and I don't know whether he was defeated the next time or the time following that.
Yeah, Al Scott, was he involved in that?
I can't remember Al Scott being involved in it. He may have been. I don't...
I've seen some of the press clippings of that time.
He may have been in the House at that time, and not yet in the Senate. I believe that's the case. So he may have been involved, I think he was on the House side of it.
So what was the nature of the House's opposition to the Senate plan?
Oh, it was racial. They knew exactly what they were doing, which is exactly what I said they were going to do, and that's they had to divide the black vote in such a way that it could not produce its own person, but it would, and at the same time, block the development of the Republican Party. You know, some of the interesting side effects, of course, I was castigated in the media.
I've seen some of those clippings.
Oh, just horrible.
Resegregating.
Oh, yeah. And which I wasn't used to. The Atlanta papers endorsed a 27-year-old opponent of mine with no legislative background, and they endorsed him for the office the next election. The Justice Department told me that the Atlanta papers' coverage of it was the most race-baiting coverage they had seen anywhere in the country. They could not believe the Atlanta paper. Bond, if you go back and look at the cartoon, is portrayed as a monkey. The editorialist saying, what good would it do to have a black in the Congress? He would only be one of a few and couldn't get anything done. Incredible from an intellectual center. I was staggered and stunned by it.
Especially since you had fairly good press. So
oh yeah, and do again.
Mm-hmm.
But it was You know, the thing of it is, the liberal media, you would expect to show some sensitivity to the black effort to grow, and the hostility was directed more at the black than the Republican aspects of it.
Though in the state house, I mean, in the House, certainly it was directed at the Republican aspects too. I mean,
Both, although it would be a toss-up as to who was suffering the most. Oddly enough, my Republican, a very conservative group, I expected a lot of difficulty from my Republican colleagues, and never really got it. And when I would speak, I would always say that, yes, I'm trying to create an opportunity for a conservative to be elected to Congress, but I believe very strongly that there is a congressional district just clear as the sun coming up in the east, setting in the west, for the blacks in this state. They have more than enough. They are all contiguous. They should have a member of Congress. And I got warm reception to that, and I was somewhat surprised by it. It also is consistent with the creation of the first black districts in Fulton County. It was a consistent pattern, and I was very comfortable with it. I'd been through it before, but I was pleasantly surprised by party's response. I was shockingly taken aback by the Atlanta papers.
Right, I've seen you and Bond and all. Sometimes you, Bond and Allgood.
Yeah, they would characterize, I saw
one that said "integration, rest in peace" or something.
Well, one has this, which Allgood referred to, interestingly enough, on the farewell in the Senate the other day, had him holding a lantern in a cemetery, and Julian and I were digging up segregation. And I asked him if that was the light of truth, or was it? How were they portraying you, Tom? And those were tough times, and but I was really committed to that one, and there's no telling the hours that were expended.
And what kind of, you say you guys were the technicians, what are you talking about?
Myself, I was personally involved with it day and night. It was a major legislative battle. As I said, it would be hundreds of man hours, and all my staff. My aides was totally volunteers.
Doing the number crunching.
Planning, writing, the case that was made to the Justice Department. It would be wonderful if we could get all those files. I mean, the arguments that were made about what was happening and why it shouldn't happen, the justification that there should be a black district. Basically, I was very open. I said the Republicans have no standing in the law. The blacks do, and that's what we're going to use. And the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
And so the whole argument was justifying a black district, and that the black had been was being malapportioned with intent. And there was no doubt. And as the case opened up, they were in real trouble.
What kind of contact did you have with the Southern Regional ACLU or some of the other groups?
ACLU put 2 attorneys on it, and David Walbert was one. The other fellow was Chris Coates. They were great fellows. I enjoyed working with them, and they were helpful because they had been through the Voting Rights Act side of it, and I had not had that experience. And they explained the kinds of criteria that made a difference. And then what I knew was, from the inside, I could supply the criteria because I knew what was doing, who was saying what. I knew Fulton County by that time. As I said, having been through this twice, I knew Fulton County from front to back. And I knew the issue of compacting and of splitting and of contiguous neighborhoods. We were just well suited to make that case. So all the writing and all the paper preparation and the scheduling of the meetings were being done by our office. and I was keeping Julian. You know, Julian is a funny kind of guy. I mean, that's not his forte.
Right.
And so we were keeping him briefed, and you know, I don't, no regrets. It was a perfect match. It was typical, happens in reverse here. A lot of papers are being prepared for me, and I have to go for the committee or whoever and make the pitch. In this case, I was the staff, and he was the spokesperson.
You know, on the Senate side, on the legislative side, who are allies and who are opponents, or
Oh, most, you know, all the votes were close, and I don't remember the sequence of the votes. I remember us prevailing. Senate plan did prevail, but they caved in. You know, the House wasn't going to accept it, and they caved in, which was what launched the battle. Allgood was a key ally, but there were others. There were people trying to be fair, and when it got close to their, a lot of them didn't understand what was happening. When it got close to their districts, they'd fall off. There were some casualties. Tom Scott, member of the Senate in DeKalb County, was a casualty because they were really doing some very bad things. Lester was ultimately a casualty, although I think for more than just these reasons. Scott was literally a casualty of drawing the districts as they should be drawn, and he couldn't survive. Todd Evans was not Todd Evans was not. He was supportive, even though it was cost him. Yeah, he was supportive. Very, very wise, bright. He was a real loss to the Georgia Senate and to Fulton County. I wish he had a chance to run for the House subsequent to that and did not do it.
Just, I know you have to go, but, you know, looking forward to what's going to happen in the next reapportionment, assuming if Georgia gets 2 more congressmen, you know, do you have any speculation, given what you know of the process and the demographics, as to
Well, what I'm going to tell the committee is don't fool around with the racial balances, because if you do, you're going to get right back in court. The same people are still at the Justice Department as were there 10 years ago.
Throughout.
Forever. Paul Hancock, and I don't know who the young girl is now, but she's still there. And they remember what Georgia, from top to bottom, so just don't even fool with it.
Hancock was the...
I don't know his official title. He was head, I guess, the Civil Rights Division. Tough cookie. And very dedicated to what he was doing. So what's going to happen is that at least 2 senators and maybe 3 are going to move from rural Georgia to suburban Georgia. And it's just like, if you look at it now, I was thinking about it this morning, the 1st district's in Savannah, 2nd, 3rd, but the 5th is in DeKalb County, and the 9th is in Gwinnett. Well, what's going to happen is the 10th and the 12th and 14th are going to suddenly find themselves up here. You're going to have 3 senators, I think, that come into the suburban area, and this is going to be a telling reapportionment.
How about the congressional?
Congressional is going to surround this huge donut. You're going to end up probably with another 4th district type district, at least 1, maybe 2.
What do you think about the possibility of a sort of a segregated Republican district across the northern tier?
Yeah, I think it's a strong possibility. The Democrats always have the option to split them up, which they can do with Republicans, although there's new case law beginning to take shape that may ultimately stop that. But they could try to split them up or compact them, and I think what they'll probably do is compact them so that they don't have...
So that they only have 1.
Give them 1, and...
What does that mean for Gingrich?
Newt is... he'll probably be okay, although he lives in an area where you can tamper with him.
Jonesboro now.
Yeah, I mean, you can, but the area has become more and more Republican over the years, He knew it'd be kind of hard for him to handle, although surely he'll be a target to some extent because of the national stature and the speaker right and those
Murphy.
issues. Speaker
Right.
Murphy, those things will come into play. Uh, I suspect he'll survive, but I think he'll spend some anxious nights over it. And I think the other message I'm going to give these guys is to be generous, because it's the toughest process for a legislature to deal with, bar none. It is really difficult, and the nerves really get
So,
frayed.
on people's,
Yeah, their whole careers are at stake, and it almost loses, it becomes almost an irrational thing. People are exhausted at the end of it, and tempers frayed, somebody will get hurt, no doubt. There's just too much demographic change.
is that inherent? And if so, then are there any measures that you can do to sort of help the process along?
Well, I think to the extent that they have people that have been through it involved with it, that is wise. In other words, if they've seen it, they can help guide the committee and prepare them for,
know what the
and sort of know where the rough spots are going to be. And like Todd, I mean, as I said, it was months before I went and had lunch with him, and I got the map out and I said, Todd, this is going to really be bad. They're either going to push you in my district, or they're going to push you in David Scott's district, and you're not popular, so you're an easy hit.
And instead, they moved your district down to the
I think I don't even
Virginia
remember.
Highland.
Yeah, I think I ended up, well, they just split it. I ended up with most of the white precincts in his district. It was really one of the sad moments for me, but I saw it coming. And he had no leverage, because there was no one that wanted to save him except somebody like me. And there was nothing I could do. Strange business.
I saw that.